Day 1286 of the war. Ukraine used the Flamingo missiles for the first time to strike Russian objects. They managed to destroy helicopters and destructions. The launch was more than successful. If Kyiv manages to implement the plans and seriously increase the production of these new long-range missiles, Russia will find it much harder in the missile war. If Kyiv manages to seriously produce these new long-range missiles, Russia will find it much harder in the missile war. If Kyiv manages to produce the new long-range missiles, Russia will have to achieve its goals. The attacks on the Krasnodar refinery have become known. They managed to strike a processing unit. On that note, fuel problems in Russia are growing in occupied territories. Gasoline ran out in Luhansk. Prices are also growing in many other regions, and somewhere there's simply no gasoline. In China, summit shows are taking place with the arrival of the head of India, Modi, the Russian dictator, Putin, and many others. Everyone is monitoring whether India and China's seriously restored relations will exist, as well as whether Putin will be told from Beijing to stop the war. Modi has already met with Putin, and although he shook his hand and smiled at him, he urged Russia to stop the war in Ukraine. Z channels continue to decode Gerasimov with his lie about how many territories Russia's army captured during the spring-summer offensive. The head of the general staff drew about 3 territories that are in fact not controlled by Russia at all. The military analyst Konstantin Mashevitz reports what actually happens in the Kupiansk direction. The commanders forced soldiers to rob themselves of graves due to complaining about lack of provision and food. This was reported by a sister of a serviceman, emphasizing that he was lost contact. Z war correspondent says how occupying authorities in Sevastopol have fooled volunteers, moving them out of the building and opening a department from Burbank. This and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your like, your comments, and your subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially for YouTube algorithms. Your subscriptions are important, so subscribe to the channel. And now let's move to what became known over the past 24 hours. The Ukrainian strategic missiles Flamingo tested the first public mass haul aimed at the territory controlled by the enemy. Video was posted on the Telegram channel Nikolaevsky Vanyok. The footage shows a triple launch from the Ukrainian coastline east of the sun, one or another air missiles raised with hard-fired fuel accelerators. The new weapon became known on August 17 when photo correspondent Efrem Lukatsky posted the first images of the missile on his Facebook page. According to the data, the combat unit of the Flamingo weighs 1,150 kilograms. The flight range exceeds 3,000 kilometers. The missile is protected from the influence of Russian repro systems, and its maximum speed reaches 950 kilometers per hour. Less than 9 months have passed since the missile was developed for combat use. According to CEO and technical director of the company and producer Firepoint Irina Tere, the missile is already being produced serial and is planned to release about 200 units per month. On August 21, 2025, the United States and the press reported that the current pace is 1 missile per day, but in the future production will increase. On August 20, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the Flamingo tests were successful, and mass production starts at the beginning of next year. At the same time, he emphasized that the pace of the program directly depends on its funding. Irina Terek emphasized that the missile is completely Ukrainian, developed and produced without the involvement of foreign compilers. So where did the Flamingo go? We learned this from other data. The Mi-8 helicopter was destroyed, 6 fighters attacked the barracks, and a serviceman was killed. Astra found out about the massive attack on the Ukrainian armed forces. On the morning of August 30, the airports of Simferopol attacked a UAV, killing at least 2 of them, one of them a direct attack on the Mi-8 helicopter. It was completely destroyed, Astra sources reported in the annexed area. First strike of helicopters at the Simferopol airport was reported by Ascent Research Avivector, which we discussed yesterday. According to satellite images, the fire was visible in the area where the helicopters were located, the Mi-24, and both were reported to have been destroyed. At 7 a.m. on the same day, Ukrainian missiles attacked a border zone in the area of the village of Voloshin in the city district of Amiansk on the territory of the Russian border post. Only 6 motorboats were damaged, 1 soldier, according to Astra, was killed, and 1 drone hit a military barracks in the same area. The consequences are unknown. Satellite images confirm Astra's information about the attack on the Russian border base in Crimea. The strikes were carried out by long-range Ukrainian missiles Flamingo, according to the project Militarny. If that's true, then this is the first known Flamingo strike missile controlled by the Russian authorities in history. Earlier, Astra investigated the aftermath of a massive Ukrainian attack on the 30th August in the Simferopol airport. As I've already mentioned, the Mi-8 helicopter was destroyed in the border zone in the army, and 6 water reservoirs were damaged in the Armiansk area. A soldier was attacked at a barracks, and satellite images of a low resolution of the Kopernik dataspace ecosystem confirmed the defeat of the border base in the village of Voloshin. We're talking high-quality satellites, but even here one of them has been nearly coerced to zero, and a bottom-bottom deformation has occurred, writes the Ukrainian OSIN project, Yukohora. Source points of the Militarny project among Ukrainian soldiers indicate that a border zone is annexed. Crimea has been attacked by long-range Flamingo missiles. Again, this is the first publicly known fact of the use of such Ukrainian missiles. Officially, it has not yet been confirmed, but it looks similar. Judging by the scale of the damage and the scale of the destruction, it is not a drone, it is a missile. So Flamingo is getting into the game. Unit Prizrek of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine carried out an operation to defeat key targets in air navigation of the GLONASS system of Russian occupiers in Crimea, writes the publication Militarny. The corresponding video was exposed by the press service Gerasimov, and according to the intelligence Kamikaze. Drones struck the TLSD radar complex designed to control the air movement. During his work, control of air traffic, both civilian and military, is significantly complicated. Another important goal has become a radar-locked MP-10 defense station. This radar, developed in the early 70s, has a mobile version called MYS. It provides guidance to determine coordinates, government affiliations on submarines, and small-scale rapid-stage targets in the open sea and cruise areas. In the large medium-scale ship, the station detected distances of up to 200 kilometers and small submarines up to 19 kilometers. Its strike can affect operations linked to sea drones. The Mr. 10 also determines coordinates and movement parameters of targets in relative geographic systems and transmits data to an automatic collection and processing system. The station can be used for sailors in narrow areas, piercings, or raids. In addition, the 96L6AP anti-aircraft missile system, part of the S-400 anti-aircraft missile system, was hit. It should be noted the strike of two critically important navigation objects, the GLONASS satellite navigation complex and the RT-70 radio telescope P-2500 in Yevpatoria. The telescope was turned into a command mapping complex of Russia's space forces. In December 2014, a fiber-resistible informational calculating system was deployed, allowing surveillance and correction of program time tasks for the GLONASS satellite system. This system collects data from the orbital grouping, compensates for their information from other regions, and adjusts accuracy of measures and coordinates. It also plays a significant role in navigating Russian military aviation, making flying it more complex. The initial oil processing unit burned down after a drone strike at the refinery in Krasnodar on August 30. On the night of August 30, drones of the Ukrainian armed forces attacked the territory of the AFIB refinery in Krasnodar. According to Astra's MCH sources, the refinery caught fire. The initial oil processing unit is the most important element, without which everything else is impossible, as yesterday in the economic report by Volodymyr Melov. The refinery evacuated over 50 personnel and the plant's operations were temporarily suspended. Earlier, Krasnodar Krei's headquarters reported a collapse of debris, of course on the territory of Krasnodar refinery, and damage to one of the technological units. The fire area was 300 square meters. Authorities asked residents not to go out, but the results of the refinery's strike are already visible to the unarmed eye. Gasoline AI-92 and AI-95 are running out in occupied Luhansk. LNRs are waiting in line at the refineries and are waiting several hours for them to be filled, local channels reported. Authorities stated the temporary lack of gasoline for AI-92 and AI-95. The current situation is said to be break-in in deliveries, as well as increased customer demand for fuel observed over the past 2 weeks. At the same time, a shortage is possible in the separate HCS republics due to the continued increased demand for residents and the decrease in reserves for suppliers, LNR top ministry stated. Until then, the gasoline sales at AI-92, due to shortage, had been halted in the Kuril district of Sakhalin region. In the Primorsk region, kilometers were reported to the HCS, and in Zabykalinsk, gasoline was started being sold along the columns. The gasoline shortages have also occurred in annexed Crimea. This is exactly what I was telling you yesterday, and it included messages from volunteers telling them to take a canister of gasoline with them to the occupied territories, because first it costs a lot, around 80 rubles per liter, and secondly there is simply no gasoline on many refineries, so yes, it has a direct effect. There was a discussion, a big one I saw, well, not a big one, but a small discussion of how seriously gasoline funds Russia's military capabilities. I heard a quite interesting and quite discussed thesis that since Russian military equipment is driven by diesel, the basics for Russian logistics aren't important at all. I don't agree with that statement because I analyze a large number of equipment used by Russian units. Most recently, in recent half a year, civil vehicles have been refurbished for military purposes on gasoline, not on diesel. Drinkers, many of them are also on gasoline. Diesel drinkers are a big rarity. Pickups that are used for military purposes, they are on gasoline. Well, and a lot of things are filled with gasoline, in fact, and volunteers all drive on gasoline in their cars. Army volunteers, well, that is, those who bring drones there, those who bring all sorts of necessary things there for military people. We know that the Russian army is largely insured by volunteers. Therefore, the stories that the Russian army does not use gasoline look dubious to me. If these are some statements under which there is some data of numbers, then I would look at these numbers. Because again, what I see in the constantly monitoring of Z channels is transferred NIVs for military purposes on gasoline, transferred Jigulis for military purposes on gasoline. All these Frankenstein mobiles that are collected from civilian transport for assault attacks, well, in fact, they take some 8th or Moskvich and redid it in the bug. Yes, all this is on gasoline. Yes, and we see that in Russian assaults in principle, such an unarmored equipment is quite used. That is, it is civilian equipment redid for such purposes, that is, in attempts to fly in quickly, land quickly, and so on. Therefore, for sure, the gasoline shortage, it influenced directly on the Russian army, at least according to the data published by the Z channels itself, by the FOU itself, which stands with the Z channels itself, and so on. And I do not take all the other aspects, including economic problems, the problem of fuel transport, and so on, and so on. Here, so well, I don't know if someone wants to insist that there is no Russian army. They do not use gasoline at all, and Z volunteers do not use gasoline, who bring that is, they are also the shoulder of logistics, of course. Then I would like to see what the people claiming this rely on. But in any case, it seems to me that already from the reaction of Z-men and from the data that comes from the Russian oil transport, it is clear that the strike on the refinery is very effective, not only effective, and that if Ukraine does not will stop if in September the same pace that was in August, then the Russian fuel sector is waiting a massive crisis, well, that is, which Russia cannot fight in any way. But why it cannot fight these strikes on the refinery? In fact, the Z channels themselves told about this. I made separate videos about this. Look, if you missed on Saturday, I would release it on this channel. But before we move on, I remind you that you can support this channel not only with your like, comment, and subscription, which is strictly all obligatory, but you can support and financially do it on Patreon, the link to which I promised in August to do some activity for patriots. Nothing is done. There were a lot of events, there was a lot of work. Unfortunately, I did not have time to do anything. I can't say whether it will work or not, so if you want to subscribe exactly for some bonuses, in addition to the ones that are marked, well, that is your name at the end of the video, getting into the chat for patrons, and in fact, on the big account, everything is so. If you want something else, additional content, then it is probably better not to subscribe if you just want to support the channel and the release of new videos. Then the link to Patreon is in the description. Well, you can also buy a VPN. This is a tool to bypass blocking, which allows you to bypass blockages, allow you to use YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, call Telegram, and WhatsApp, use Discord, go to blocked resources. In short, use the internet as it seems to you right and necessary. Many are now discussing summit shot, where part of the world's leaders are meeting at Xi Jinping's guests. You've probably seen many analysts meeting with larger envelopes than Putin, saying how great it looks in the photo if he's closer to the Chinese leader and so on. I don't like all this nonsense very much because I don't consider him a big fan of stretchers along a carpet, handhold lines, or anything else. At the same time, cutting the importance of the summit, not planning it itself, the fact of its presence is an alarm bell. China and India are natural enemies, and Trump being able to bring them closer is, of course, something of Putin's special ability, who fought both against Azerbaijan and Armenia. But I'll pay attention to the outcome of the summit, what deals will be made and what negotiations will be achieved. Specifically, the track. Meanwhile, China and Russia has a very simple marker called Strength of Siberia 2. If there are any shifts regarding it, it means Putin's trip was successful. If not, then not exactly. It's possible to say that, in principle at this summit Putin may get an order to end the war? Well, because Russia is completely under China's control economically and militarily. Sovereignty has long been sold. The other thing is, for China it makes no sense to interfere in the war in any way. While Russia is fighting in Ukraine, Kyiv and Moscow are buying details for Beijing drones, leaving Europe tense, and the US under Trump's leadership is flailing back and forth. Showing full political impotence, that situation is hardly any way fit for China. Neither defeat nor victory for China is important, or it doesn't make sense. China is more of an unfavorable scenario than its slow breaking of Ukraine. That's why I have no special hope that seat will give Putin the order to end the war. Overall, let's wait for some real consequences of the summit or their absence. For now, the only thing being taken into account is the escalation of relations between India and China, which is, of course, a massive failure of Trump's administration. As for Russia-India, despite the fact that Modi gave Putin a hand, he called on the Kremlin dictator to most likely end the war in Ukraine. During a meeting with Vladimir Putin at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Russian president called on the end of the war in Ukraine, writes India Today. The video with Modi's speech was posted on his official Twitter account. Most of the video is about the war in Ukraine. We are constantly discussing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. We support all recent efforts to establish peace. We hope all sides will move forward constructively. We call on ending the conflict as soon as possible, Modi said. Modi in China spoke with Vladimir Zelensky. After that, Zelensky said India is ready to make the necessary effort and give the appropriate signal to Russia and other leaders during the meeting at the summit fields. Well, one day we'll see how it all looks. Meanwhile, the Financial Times provides detailed information on how security guarantees for Ukraine are being formed in Europe right now. European capitals are working on rather exact plans for possible deployment of troops in Ukraine under post-war security guarantees that will be fully supported by U.S. forces. According to the chairman of the European Commission in an interview with the Financial Times, there is a clear roadmap for such possible positions. Security guarantees are of fundamental importance, absolutely necessary, the Financial Times said. We have a clear roadmap. We had a deal with the White House and the work is going very well. The Financial Times spoke during a trip across eastern EU countries with a border with Russia, the Financial Times wrote, emphasizing the need to increase defense costs and Europe's military readiness. Financial Times noted the national duties to reform Western forces. It clarified that the capital is working through plans to multinationally deploy troops in support of the Americans. President Trump assured us there would be American presence as part of this support, she said. This was clearly confirmed multiple times. Ukraine has required specific security guarantees from Western allies, including troops present in its area, as part of any peace deal Vladimir Putin is supposed to conduct during the 3.5 summer war. There are potential tens of thousands of servicemen, led by Europeans. This agreement was signed at the meeting of President Donald Trump, President Volodymyr Zelensky, and leading European leaders last month. Participants are expected in Paris on Thursday to invite French President Emmanuel Macron to continue talks at a high level, Financial Times reported. 3 diplomats familiar with the plans include German Chancellor Merz, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Secretary General Mark Rutte, and Salma Fondley. The Élysées Court of Courage refused to comment on it. Last week, the defense minister and the so-called coordination meeting, and according to Underline, plans were developed quite accurately, including discussing the right elements for a full deployment of troops. Of course, political decisions of the appropriate country are always important, as deploying troops is one of the most important sovereign decisions of the nation, she added, but the sense of emergency is very high, the process is moving forward, everything really gains form. The Underline praises Trump's commitment to peace after months of uncertainty in Europe's positions regarding U.S. President Trump, who previously praises Putin and conflicted with Zelensky. Putin did not change, he is an interceptor, she said. Trump wants peace, but Putin will not sit at the negotiation table. His experience of communication with Putin is negative. Putin increasingly fails to fulfill his promises. Anyway, in the last month we had several clashes which made it clear that Europeans can lie down. When we say something, we do. Any Western military deployment into post-war Ukraine will support a significantly reinforced Ukrainian army, which will become the core of the deterrence forces. The European Commission will consider new funding sources to sustain the funding of Ukrainian armed forces as a security guarantee, said von der Leyen. After any peace agreement, Kyiv will need a large number of soldiers. They need good pay and, of course, modern weapons, unquestionably. The EU will have to lie down. Existing funding flows for Ukraine from Brussels, including budget support, should remain in peacetime, she emphasized, meaning additional payments for Ukraine's armed forces. The EU will also preserve funding for training Ukrainian soldiers after a peace agreement. The EU urged members to use a fund of 150 billion euros, as loans for arms or to sign joint production agreements with Ukrainian defense companies or to buy weapons in order to hand over Kyiv. I urge members of the state to fund the raising of defense potential, said von der Leyen. The nature of the war has changed completely, she added, noting the need to invest in drone systems, air and missile defense as well as cosmic cyber capabilities. And don't get me wrong, I think this is quite important. Security guarantees are indeed a key element after military agreements. Another question is, the word after military confuses me because, as you can see, this is the end of the war. I don't see any hint of it so far. I don't see any movement for Putin toward peace. I don't see any possibility of seeing peace literally in the coming week or month. Therefore, without pressure from Putin and the strengthening of the Ukrainian army here and now, there is almost no point in talking about any post-war security guarantees, because Russia right now continues to kill Ukrainians, shoot up Ukraine, destroy Ukrainian cities, launch missiles at civil infrastructure every day. Here is an example for you which is probably not so large scale, but I think this story, it quite honestly shows that the problem is there and now, and it is much wider than post-war guarantees because the war is still going on. Jessie the dog for 2 days waited for her master near the ruin of the house in Kyiv after the attack on Russia. He did not come so much since he died. The Kyiv rescuers lured the dog. A video showing a dog among the ruins appeared in local media and reported that the dog, called Jessie, was looking for its master. According to neighbors, the dog died standing next to the attacked house on August 28. Later, Ukrainian authorities reported that Jessie has become a part of the big family and will live with them. On August 28, Jessie lost her man during a cynical Russian attack on Kyiv. She spent 2 days looking for him, but he will never come back. This story hit the heart of thousands of Ukrainians, and we couldn't leave Jessie alone, so we report. Now she has a new family, a family of rescuers. She will live with us beyond the city in nature in love and friendship, principle important. No chains, only life and freedom next to people as she is used to. We promise everyone who cares about Jessie, health, investigation, and adaptation are ahead of her, so for now, she will live in a branch. This is only a small episode of endless tragedies caused by Russian weapons on Ukrainian land. And this war has not ended yet. Putin has not been fully suppressed or fully reinforced by the Ukrainian army. All these talks about post-war security guarantees still seem important to me. But much more important is what the countries of Europe, including, are going to do here and now in order to stop this bloody war. Relying on Putin or Trump or Xi Jinping doesn't make sense, I think. Meanwhile, let's move to the front itself. Russia has 1/3 intensified its support for the Russian army in Ukraine following the spring-summer campaign. Russia's head, Valery Gerasimov, significantly increased his support for the Russian army during this week's offensive, according to analysts from America. Gerasimov's overall assessment of the Russia's capture of territory in March is 1/3 higher than was confirmed via objective control data. Gerasimov reported on the outcomes of the spring-summer campaign. In Ukraine, he stated that in that time, Russia captured 3,500 square kilometers of territory and 149 settlements along the entire front line. Photos and videos from the front confirm the capture of only 2,346 square kilometers of territory, writes the AFP. Thus, Gerasimov exceeded the achievement of the Russian army by at least 1,000 square kilometers and many settlements, according to military analysts. Gerasimov reported that Russia took 50% of Kupiansk, Kharkiv Oblast, under control, and the AFP confirmed the capture of only 6.3%, according to the old map, which we will discuss now. Appropriate reality and numbers of military analysts were found on the map, which was seen during the speech of the head of the Russian General Staff on this map. As the military analyst Yan Matveev noted, there is too much of a salient to the northeast of Pokrovsk, and there is no breakthrough to the eastern Kostianivka. It seems that for the General Staff, all the territory where the Russian soldier was noticed is under the control of Russia, writes the Twitter analyst under the nickname named Dmitry dates. The statements of Gerasimov that Russia's army did not agree to, the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces, claiming them as sheer lies and attempts to project a realism, as I reported yesterday in Kyiv. They stated that in Russia during the spring and summer they did not get control over a single large city, and the numbers provided in Moscow have significantly inflated. Analysts from the War Research Institute believe that with the statement of success, Moscow is trying to create a false sense of rapid pace of Russia's advance in the West and thus influence Western politics. The Kremlin is trying to convince the West that Russia is inevitable to achieve its military goals on the battlefield, so Ukraine must meet Russian demands and the West, accordingly, should stop supporting Ukraine, experts write. But it continues to refute Gerasimov and large Z channels. For example, this was continued by Yuri Podolyak, one of the largest Z channels. Who frames Gerasimov's NGC? The answer is yes, he writes. What does a successful anti-crisis in Kupiansk say? Judging by our command in the Kupiansk area after my yesterday's report on the involvement of our troops in this sector, it sharply included the anti-crisis operation, the Russian flag on the tower. From Moscow they were asked why I believe the anti-crisis flag on the tower, writes Podolyak. Here everything's simple. The flag's on the tower as it was not done long ago on the right bank of the Dnipro in the Kherson region. No fighters ever carry them out. This is senseless and dangerous. Much easier and more promising than soldiers moving them themselves on the ground strapped to the ground. On the tower they are usually through in drones with magnets attached to them. Thank God it's made of iron. If we look closely at the video, it's obvious that this is how our flag on the Televishka in Kupiansk appeared. If it had been hanged, it would have been completely different. They would have removed the drone from the moment of launch, not just lying still on the tower as canvas. And from here I return again to the initial thesis, since the anti-crisis was quickly organized. Moscow had demanded proof of the head of the General Staff, who had delivered it. Almost half of Kupiansk's command, and the command on the ground couldn't come up with anything better than to drop the flag, Russia's flag, on the TV tower, which precisely proves that the guys there are out of control and feeding our General Staff limbo reports. They are being set up by the NGB. So, yesterday's question, who supplies Valery Gerasimov, was answerable. And the most hilarious part of this story is that even control over this point doesn't proof of anything in terms of control over half of the city, writes Podolyak. The real situation on the Kupiansk direction is described by military analyst Konstantin Mashavets, assigning doubts to the successes voiced to Gerasimov. He describes the composition of the forces and funds of the enemy, that is, Russia, in this direction. The Kupiansk direction, he writes, is actually on adjacent flanks of the operational zones of two groups of Russian army units, north and west. The corresponding name of their army, division, and regiments are deployed now in the offensive on Kupiansk. In addition, the Russian troops advancing in this direction have been reinforced by a whole number of mobilization reserves as part of the battalion, and in their interests they are engaged in connecting encircled units of both circles. It is quite difficult to determine the total number of enemy troops operating in Kupiansk, writes Mashavets, citing two factors. It is quite difficult to determine the total number of enemy troops operating in Kupiansk. In addition, the command of both troops operating in this direction, as well as the command of both groups, is quite actively maneuvering with subordinates not only within its lines and zones of responsibility, but also in lines and zones of responsibility for each other. Next, he writes the current situation. At the moment, he writes, the main effort of the command of Russian armed forces obviously concentrated in the line of his 6th Army, which is the operational tactical bridgehead on the Askal River, created by the enemy from the north of the city of Kupiansk on the area from Stroivka to Golubovka. It is clear that the close goal of the Russian offensive from this bridgehead is to block the city of Kupiansk from the north and northwest, which provides for blocking roads from Kupiansk, both to Dvorichная and Veliky Burluk, and to Chugev, and a breakthrough with the forces of forward units within the city itself. In addition, it is obvious that the linked goal of the Russian troops in the 6th Army region is further advance in the Veliky Burluk direction, for which part of the 6th Army, after maintaining the bridgehead in Askal, managed to wedge into our border Kharkov region near the village of Melov. The main goal of Russian action from the northern city of Plasdarm was to break through the general direction from north to south along the Askald River and reach the northern edge of the village of Sobolivka near Mechurina and Mechnikov streets on the northern edge of Kupiansk. As a result, Russian advanced units managed to consistently capture Kondrashevka, Golubovka, Radkovka, several blocks northwest of Kupiansk's northern edge. However, later this week Ukrainian forces consistently counterattacked and managed to hold control over Sobolivka. Russian forces are likely trying to push the enemy out of Borsograd, largely to reduce enemy control zone on northern Kupiansk's outskirts. Obviously, there are several Russian assault groups, yet only a few houses are held. Moreover, counterattacking Ukrainian units are apparently close to fully pushing the enemy off the western Kupiansk-Dvorichная road from Kondrashevka to Kupiansk. Russian forward units here still hold Radkovka, Kupiansk outskirts near the city cemetery, as well as gas refineries by Krapotov and Tatneft, but it's clearly difficult for them to do so. Any Russian units operating operating in the Kondrashevka district itself are apparently unstable as well. They cannot break through to Tishchenkovka, nor can they establish stable positions in Kondrashevka itself. Some Ukrainian units are clearly holding the southern part of the village and a couple of tree lines southeast of it, complicating that. Russian army's support for their assault groups in the village itself from Kalinovo. On the southern flank of the Kupiansk bridge, Russian forward units temporarily attack around Kruglakovka-Kolsnikovka, attempting to expand their breakthrough toward Oskol further south of the city, without yielding any results so far, but they aren't particularly persistent, understanding that Kupiansk's fate is clearly dependent on the northern face. Mishevitz also writes about prospects. Obviously, the entire tactical success of Russian advanced units, and more precisely Kupiansk at the moment, is quite unstable in two ways. Ukrainian forces continue to hold an area between Kondrashevka and Radkovka that could be flanked by those who intercepted Kondrashevka, as well as those who reached the Kupiansk cemetery and captured Radkovka. Ukrainian forces could act in this regard, either from the small Shapkovka-Tichinkovka side or from Kupiansk itself. Moreover, in this context, Latsdarm itself is quite narrow and therefore simply vulnerable. All this, in turn, forces Russia to act northward, northwestern Kupiansk, not only in narrow areas and with fairly limited forces. It can simply not accumulate there enough to completely crush the mass. All these assault groups of Russian armed forces and their narrow tactical clashes toward Kupiansk and Latsdarm north of it are still not eliminated in Ukrainian armed forces for one simple reason. They simply lack the strength to organize and conduct simultaneous and counterattacking operations, both on the flanks of these clashes and from the city's defense area. For now, they only lack the fact of blocking these clashes and not allowing them to expand. However, the situation could well change. Russia pulling out Latsdarm with a comparatively narrow stretch along Oskol has apparently made it quite vulnerable. For this reason, Russia cannot concentrate its assault infantry in the direction of Kupiansk. They've already been redirected to Latsdarm, so they have to deal with covering and holding the flanks of those who had already started assaulting Kupiansk along Oskol. Russia's southern but most threatening point for the Kupiansk unit, Placidar MVS, still represents a fairly narrow stretch stretching along Oskol, estimated at 4.547 kilometers. Ukrainian forces can yet not recantate it due to its shortage of own forces and resources, and if this shortage has been overdue, Mushevitz suggested. In addition, Russia has yet to widely stretch heavy arms across Placidar MVS Zaskal. The places of its crossings in the southern central parts of Placidar MVS Zaskal, obviously, are under constant and dense surveillance, as well as fire control. That's why the Russian army has to stretch it with a significant stretch through the northern part. It's fair for regular material and technical supply. Moreover, near Krasnodar 1, Ukrainian forces seem to be able to block any movement of Ukrainian forces and Russian material and technical facilities from the northern part of Platsdarm to the central and southern parts. They are just 1.5 kilometers from Zaskal and clearly have the opportunity to break through wide nomenclature of targeting the road leading from Kamensk to Novomlinsk directly from the river. It is therefore that all the bravado statements of General Gerasimov that they will take Kupiansk today or tomorrow seem at the moment, let's say, very, very hypothetical, Mushevitz notes. I would even say, he adds, that it is very premature. Yes, the 6th Army of Russia with the added forces and means was able to break through to it from the north from its bridgehead on Zaskal, but clearly with limited forces and on quite narrow and therefore vulnerable areas. What if something happened to its forward units? What happened to their colleagues from the 51st Army, which managed to run even deeper, kilometers so much on the Dobrapilya direction? No one has now seen any special reserves of Ukrainian ones on Kupiansk in the direction, but this does not mean at all that they do not exist in the nature, writes Mushevitz. Well, now to the absence of Russian Z-channels. One of them, Zworkoraminov, tells the story of how the occupation authorities of Sevastopol threw everyone. In October 2023, he writes, I understood the story that the headquarters and at the same time the government aid warehouse of the volunteer organization We Are Together in Sevastopol were intended to be relocated just to open a fundraising branch there. And all the services of the governor of Sevastopol, Razvazhev, threw everyone to convince everyone that the governor would not let this happen, and all of this is generally fake. The result, the volunteer movement We Are Together headquarters in Sevastopol, located at Lenin 39, was relocated according to the address now located off of Esperat. Now the governor's choice is being made in Sevastopol. The author writes himself, Romanov does not urge to vote for someone specifically. I have generally decided not to participate in any political movements until the end of the SVO and Imhok when the war is coming, not until political games. Together with this, I appeal to the people of Sevastopol, he writes. It is now time to recall all the inappropriate realities of the facts that have struck you and to solve. Do you want a continuation of this PR show? I separately want to note the pathetic symbolic volumes of help by dilating it to the front. There are head regions in the country that help the adults, not for PR when you are looking at the camera. It makes the impression that this is not his war. Take, for example, the story with the theft of body armor for the 810th Brigade of soldiers and the lives of the fighters. The beginning of this story is, by the way, just ahead. There's a small chance that the UAVs will still try to put an end to the real situation of the case in the city of Hero and Sevastopol, and determine where the problem sectors are simply closed by the PR of the current governor. So, as you can see, even if you're a military correspondent and support everyone throws it, whether volunteers or not, because the authorities don't care. They just want to steal, stole, and fulfill their ambitions. Now there's Putin, who wants to destroy Ukraine, and there are a lot of former MMPs under him who just want to steal more and are using it in their own interests. Yes, very similar things are happening with Russian troops as well. Sister Torbiva Oleksandra Oleksandrovich, serving in the 175th Intelligence Battalion, Military Unit 54399, 76th Guard Air Assault Division, told about the incident in the unit. Oleksandr told 3 soldiers he does not belong to the unit. Soldiers didn't get food for over 10 days while they were at the front, and when they came back from their mission, Oleksandr was kept in a basement. He was then starved, and when servicemen left the basement, he was taken to the forest near the city of Kursk. Oleksandr asked his sister to give this information to the military prosecutor's office, so measures could be made to stop abusing servicemen. And what is this actually about? His sister is telling. This situation occurred. My brother, who was on duty, didn't contact him for a long time. Today, he managed to go out, but he wrote that they were fed for a long time. They didn't get to eat. Then something happened and they were generally locked in the basement, or rather, his room, I don't know. He was sitting in the basement, hungry again. This morning he wrote that they forced the night to the pit. I asked, what pits? To which he wrote to myself, what happened? I don't know what to do. I don't know either. I called the hotline, left many thousand messages, probably requests. I don't know what to do, and I was advised to make announcements. I only have immediate messages, nothing else, nothing. He just disappeared from the line, left, and no longer responded. So, if you go to the Russian army, you know you're going to die there, not in some bravado for your own country, because no one attacked Russia, but die, in fact, from your own command for the sake of Vladimir Putin's interests and, in fact, kneel down to be spared. This is, in fact, the path of any Russian serviceman, so avoid the Russian army with all possible means, but if you get there, run away. Go to the forest. The organization will help you with that if you make the decision that you no longer want to be a killer and you no longer want to be killed. This was Michael Nacke with you, and until next time, all the best. Goodbye.